The wind dragged dust across the street as if the whole town had conspired to push her out. Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, but the fabric was too thin, threadbare from years of wear. Whispers followed her steps. Boots scuffed, spurs clicked, and laughter carried sharp as broken glass. She kept her chin high, though her stomach clenched with hunger and shame. If she slowed, someone would spit near her feet. If she looked back, she'd catch the sneer of a man who had once bought her a drink and now condemned her for breathing his air. At the saloon's porch, a boy no older than 12 flung a stone at her, shouting a word she'd learned long ago to swallow without flinching. The rock missed her cheek by an inch. She didn't stop. To stop was to give them power. To stop was to admit they'd already won. Across the street, a man stood with 2 little girls gripping the legs of his worn trousers. His shoulders were broad, his hat tipped low, and his jaw shadowed with days of work and too little rest. Samuel Carter didn't speak, didn't move, but his eyes followed her. There was no malice in his gaze, only a quiet calculation, as though he weighed her against some private measure. The crowd's jeers rose louder. A woman stepped out of the general store, hands on her hips. "You don't belong here, Clara. Best move along before the sheriff sees fit to lock you up again." She bit back a retort, though the words burned in her throat. What would it matter? The sheriff turned his head each time she asked for help. No law in this town worked in her favor. Her knees trembled. The hunger had been gnawing for days, making her vision blur at the edges. She reached for the hitching post to steady herself, but her hand slipped. The laughter cracked louder. Then boots struck the dirt, heavy and certain. Samuel Carter crossed the street, his daughters tugging at him, confused but trusting. He stopped in front of Clara, a solid wall between her and the eyes that cut her down. The townsfolk grew quiet, their surprise almost louder than their scorn. "You need shelter," he said, voice low and even. "And I need a mother for my girls. What do you say?" The words didn't land at once. Clara blinked, swaying slightly. She searched his face for mockery, for cruelty disguised as kindness, but his expression stayed plain, lined with exhaustion and something harder, resolve. A ripple of laughter spread from the saloon steps. A man barked, "Hear that? Carter's so desperate he'll wed a stray." Another voice added, "Fine choice, Sam. She'll steal the boots off your feet while you sleep." Samuel ignored them. He knelt, steadying one of his daughters who clung shyly to his arm, then looked up at Clara again. They don't need perfection. They just need someone who won't give up on them. Her chest tightened. For a moment, she saw herself reflected in those girls. Small, abandoned, clinging to whatever promise might hold. A dangerous hope flared in her, but doubt cut sharper. "You don't know me," she whispered. "I've seen enough," he replied. The silence that followed was heavier than the crowd's laughter. She could turn away, keep walking until her legs failed, find another town where the whispers would begin again. Or she could take the hand that reached toward her, the one roughened by work and grief. Her pride fought her desperation, but her desperation won. She placed her hand in his. The crowd gasped, some with ridicule, some with disbelief. Samuel rose, her hand still in his, and the girls pressed closer, studying her with wide, uncertain eyes. "Then it's settled," he said simply. The walk back to the ranch stretched longer than Clara expected. Silence hung between them, broken only by the clop of the horse carrying supplies and the chatter of the girls asking questions she couldn't yet answer. The land rolled out in golden stretches, broken by fences and a house standing tired against the horizon. Once, perhaps, it had been proud. Now, like its owner, it bore the marks of struggle. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and cedar. The hearth still held ashes from the morning fire. A table stood uneven on 3 legs and a stack of dishes leaned dangerously on the counter. Clara lowered her shawl, uncertain where to place herself. Samuel busied himself with the girls, settling them before turning back. "It won't be easy," he said. "There's work enough for 2, and I can't promise the neighbors will welcome you." "They never do," she answered, her voice sharper than she intended. She softened. "But I'll try." The first days tested her resolve. The bread burned black, the milk soured before she reached the bucket, and the chickens scattered at her touch. Samuel said little, though she felt his eyes on her, measuring her efforts against the memory of the wife he'd lost. One daughter, the younger, slipped her hand into Clara's without hesitation, eager for warmth. The older kept her distance, lips pressed tight, watching with suspicion that mirrored the town's. At night, Clara lay awake listening to the wind rattle the shutters, wondering if she'd made a mistake. Samuel's offer gave her safety, but safety was not the same as belonging. Belonging required trust, and she had spent too long in a world where trust was currency stolen at first chance. On the fourth evening, as a storm gathered over the hills, Samuel found her by the barn, shoulders hunched. She wiped at her eyes quickly, hoping the darkness would hide it. "You work hard," he said, stepping closer. "Don't think I don't see it." "They don't want me here," she murmured. "Not the town. Not even your eldest." "They'll come around," he said, though the doubt in his tone betrayed him. Clara shook her head. "You don't know the danger I bring. If anyone finds me—" She stopped herself, but the words had already slipped. Samuel studied her, brows drawn. "What danger?" Before she could answer, a distant rumble carried through the night. Not thunder, but hooves pounding fast and heavy. She froze, every muscle taut. Samuel turned toward the sound, his hand already near the rifle by the barn door. The girls called from the house, frightened by the storm. Clara's heart raced. She had thought she'd escaped the past. Now it was riding straight for them. The wind picked up, flinging rain across the yard. Clara met Samuel's eyes, and for the first time since she'd taken his hand, she felt the weight of what she had agreed to. The bargain had given her shelter, but it might cost him everything. And the riders were closing in. Rain fell in heavy sheets, drumming against the wooden walls as the riders closed in. Clara stood rigid by the window, her breath fogging the glass. Torches swayed through the darkness, orange sparks fighting the storm's fury. Samuel pressed the rifle to his shoulder, jaw clenched tight, eyes steady on the approaching figures. His daughters clung to Clara's skirts, their fear a palpable weight she could feel in every trembling tug of their small hands. The first shot shattered the stillness. Wood splintered from the doorframe, and the girls screamed. Samuel returned fire, his stance unyielding despite the chaos. Clara's body reacted before thought could intervene. She snatched the iron poker from the hearth and set the kettle above the flames, water hissing as it began to boil. Her hands trembled, but her resolve hardened. She would not let these men drag her back into a life she had fought so hard to escape. Shadows flitted across the yard. The riders circled, shouting threats, promising retribution. A second volley of bullets ripped through the shutters. Samuel fired again, his face grim, his movements precise, but the strain in his eyes betrayed the weight he carried. Fear not for himself, but for his daughters. Clara crouched low, shielding the children as glass rained across the floor. She whispered steady words, though her heart raced as fast as theirs. When the door buckled under a ram, Clara acted. She seized the kettle, flung the boiling water through the gap, and the cries of scorched flesh filled the night. Samuel used the opening to fire 2 more shots, driving the attackers back into the storm. Silence fell for a moment, broken only by the roar of rain and the crackle of the fire. "They'll be back," Samuel muttered, lowering the rifle but not his guard. His gaze shifted to Clara, reading the steel in her eyes. He had doubted her once. Not now. At dawn, muddy tracks scarred the yard. Samuel, weary but unbroken, tended to his daughters while Clara patched the window with whatever scraps she could find. The reprieve lasted only until the sound of hooves heralded the arrival of a stern figure cloaked in black. Judge Whitlock dismounted, his cold gaze sweeping the battered homestead before settling on Clara. "So this is the woman," he said, disdain dripping from every syllable. "Her reputation stains every county she's passed through. And now you invite her into a home with children." Samuel stepped forward, shoulders squared. "She defended this home while others would have run. That's more than reputation. That's truth." The judge's expression tightened. He turned to the older daughter. "Do you feel safe here, child?" His question struck like a blade. The girl wavered, torn between the suspicion she had clung to and the memory of Clara shielding her when bullets flew. Finally, with a small but steady voice, she answered, "Yes." Safer than before. Clara's throat tightened. For the first time, she felt the faintest thread of belonging, fragile but real. Yet the judge's verdict remained harsh. "Prove this stability, or I'll have no choice but to remove them." He left with a warning that lingered long after his horse disappeared into the hills. In the days that followed, Clara worked as though the judge's shadow pressed against her back. She rose with the dawn, mended fences, and kept the house in order. She soothed the younger girl's nightmares, earning trust with every whispered comfort. Even the elder, cautious and watchful, softened when Clara showed her how to braid her hair without pulling too tight. Samuel watched, his silence carrying both gratitude and an ache he dared not name. At dusk, when their hands brushed, neither drew away. But peace could not last. The outlaws returned with fire in their eyes and vengeance in their throats. This time they brought torches, their flames cutting through the night like teeth. Clara hurried the girls beneath the floorboards where blankets and food had been hidden. "Stay quiet," she whispered, pressing a kiss to each forehead. "No matter what you hear, do not come out." Their small hands clung to her fingers until the last possible moment. Gunfire erupted outside. Samuel stood in the doorway, a lone figure framed in firelight, rifle steady as he cut down the first rider who dared approach. Clara joined him, seizing the shotgun he thrust into her hands. The recoil jolted her shoulder, but she stood firm, fury blazing in her chest. She had been their prey once. Never again. The fight consumed the night. Bullets tore through wood, torches flew through broken windows, flames licking the curtains until Clara smothered them with a blanket. Samuel fought like a man with nothing left to lose, but then he faltered, a cry escaping as blood bloomed across his arm. Clara caught him before he fell, propping him against the wall. "I'll hold them," she said, voice raw but steady. "Stay with the girls." Pain stole his words, but his eyes spoke volumes. Fear for her, faith in her. She rose, shotgun gripped tight, and faced the door. When the riders surged forward, she overturned the kettle again, smoke and sparks filling the room. Blinded, coughing, they stumbled, and Clara seized her chance. She fired until her arms ached, until the last torch fell in the mud, until the yard lay silent save for the patter of rain on smoldering earth. When the storm cleared, dawn crept over the ranch. Smoke curled from blackened wood, but the house still stood. Samuel, pale but alive, managed a weak smile. "Didn't think you'd outshoot me," he whispered. Clara pressed her forehead to his, her chest shaking with relief. The girls crawled from hiding, their eyes wide, tears streaking their cheeks. They flung themselves at Clara, clinging to her as though she had always been theirs. For the first time, she embraced them without hesitation, her heart no longer doubting its place. The judge returned before midday, summoned by rumor of the fight. He expected ruin, but instead he found a family scarred yet unbroken. Clara met his gaze, chin lifted, eyes fierce. "You asked if they were safe with me. Now you've seen the answer." He looked from Samuel, wounded but unbowed, to the girls pressed against Clara's skirts, and finally to the scorched yard where outlaws had fallen. His jaw tightened, but this time no words of condemnation left his lips. He gave a single, grudging nod before turning his horse toward the horizon. The sun rose higher, spilling gold across the battered homestead. Samuel reached for Clara's hand, his grip weak but certain. She held it firmly, not out of desperation now, but with the assurance of someone who had chosen and been chosen in return. The frontier would never grant peace for long. There would be debts to settle, storms to endure, and men eager to test the strength of a scarred family. But as Clara stood with Samuel and the girls, she felt no fear. She had been an outcast, a fugitive, a woman without a place. Now she was something more: mother, wife, protector. And whatever came riding out of the horizon next, she would face it as their own.